When you use a big shield, it's almost impossible to get hit from the front. The most vulnerable places are obviously below and above the shield, so when an enemy tries to hit you, he will most likely try to hit you from above. It is for this reason an absolute necessity that a Roman soldier wore his helmet. In this video we'll take a look at Roman helmets. How were they made, maintained, used, and what did they look like? From the early Republic until the fall of the Western Roman Empire.
E aí, gente, como vai? How's it going, guys? I'm learning Portuguese with the app Babbel. It's a sponsor of today's video, so allow me a quick word on them.
Babbel offers personalized language learning programs aimed specifically at work, travel, family and friends, or just general skill improvement. And not just for beginners or the most dedicated of students, but for anyone who's willing to learn. Babbel offers short 10-minute interactive lessons made with award-winning technology, scientifically proven to get you speaking in just 3 weeks. Having used some other language learning apps in the past myself, it's clear to me Babbel's lessons are not made by AI, but indeed by real language teachers. Next to real-world, practical conversations, Babbel also focuses on grammar and pronunciation and has great speech recognition, making learning so much more effective and fun.
There is always a good reason to learn a new language, if you ask me. But especially now, with summer coming up, it's a great way to get to know the people and the culture of your holiday destination. So, if you're willing to give it a try, you should really check Babbel out. Follow the link in the description below to get 65% off your subscription, and note, they have a 20-day money-back guarantee, so there's really no excuse not to give it a try. Alright, now back to Mark and Roman helmets. Muito obrigado pela sua atenção e até breve. Ciao, amigos.
The first helmet that became a true icon of the Roman military was the so-called Montefortino helmet, named after the Italian town where many of such helmets were first found. As is so often the case, its origins lay with another civilization, the Celts. The Romans were probably first introduced to this type of helmet by engaging the Celts in combat in the 4th century BC, and from there on copied its design. The Montefortino helmet quickly became one of the most dominant helmet types throughout Europe and the Mediterranean, being used by many different nations, like the Etruscans and the Carthaginians. For the Romans, this helmet stayed in use all the way up to the early 1st century AD. It witnessed all major military events of the Roman Republic, from Hannibal and the Punic Wars to Spartacus' revolt and the civil wars of Caesar and Augustus, making it truly an iconic piece of equipment in the history of Rome. The helmet has a seemingly simple design, a plain bowl with a crest holder on top and a pair of attached cheek pieces. The crest holder could hold feathers or horsehair. Probably at this moment in time they were meant more as a decoration than as to signify rank and serve as recognition, like with the iconic centurion's crest. Finally, the Montefortino is characterized by the slightly thicker rim around the bottom of the helmet, decorated with diagonal grooves all along. This was made by beating the final edge upward and filing in the grooves. All these things make the helmet look beautiful and stylish, but none of them add anything in terms of functionality or protection. Over time, all these aesthetical characteristics of the Montefortino type disappeared. Instead, the focus shifted to functionality and ease of production. This is well demonstrated in the next generation of helmets, named the Coolus or Hagenau type helmets, again named after their find places in current-day northeastern France. This generation came into use around the middle of the 1st century BC and lasted at least until the middle of the 1st century AD. This type of helmet has a plain half-round bowl, a bigger and completely horizontal neck guard, and often also the addition of a so-called brow guard on the front, to deflect and absorb blows from the front or above. It hardly has any decorations at all, neither grooves on the edge like its predecessor, or a small decorative band of brass as a rim like its successor would have. It either has no crest holder at all, or is attached separately, by either riveting it in place or soldering. The overall design of this helmet is all about functionality and simplicity. Like the Montefortino type, these helmets are typically made of a copper alloy, either bronze or brass. Brass is made by adding zinc to copper, which is stronger than bronze, which is made by adding tin to copper. Even stronger still is iron. Iron, though, is prone to corrosion, that is rust, much more so than bronze and brass. To combat rust, a soldier would have to maintain his equipment diligently by scrubbing off any starting rust. The Romans did so by mixing olive oil with charcoal to ever so slightly grind and polish the metal. This must have been a daily chore, especially in times of bad weather. And as a preventive measure, to ward off water and dirt, they would also apply a thin layer of olive oil to the helmet. If the oil is able to dry up completely, it actually forms a sort of varnish-like coating that is especially hard to remove, and thus effective for a longer period of time. Another great item to prevent water and dirt getting onto the helmet was a leather helmet cover. Such covers were custom made to fit the helmet and could be applied easily by pulling tight the strings around the opening, sort of like a duffel bag. Such covers were probably greatly valued by soldiers for their ease of use and infallible efficiency. To rid the problem of rust completely was to apply tin, because tin does not rust and it is relatively cheap. The melting point of tin is about 230 degrees Celsius, which also makes it easy to work with. So, being easy and affordable, tin was applied to all sorts of metal pieces of equipment, including helmets. It was even done to copper and bronze helmets, next to of course iron helmets, probably very often actually. But it's hard to say with certainty how often exactly, because tin disintegrates in the ground quite quickly.
The next generation of Roman helmets is made most commonly out of iron. They are called the Weisenau type, after a little German village near the city of Mainz where they were first found. And this type of helmet came into being in the early 1st century AD, at the start of the time of the Empire, hence they are often referred to as the Imperial type helmets. These are the most popular and iconic helmets associated with the Romans, and indeed were in use for a very long time by the Romans themselves, so well worth a very close look.
In terms of the overall shape, the Weisenau type doesn't differ that much from the Hagenau type. The biggest difference is that the backside of the helmet is longer than the front, so that the neck guard starts lower and covers more of the neck and back. The neck guard is also tilted more downward. From the side, we can clearly see another difference. This type has elaborate decorative rivet bosses and also a brass trim all around the edges. These shiny decorations make for a clear visual impact, not just on us today, but also on ancient enemies, who must have been impressed by the obvious time, money, and skill spent on creating such a helmet. On the back of the helmet is the next distinctive feature, the embossed ribs on the back of the helmet and the embossed steps on the neck guard. The primary function was to reinforce those areas, but knowing the Romans, they probably also just liked the looks of it. The metal ring on the neck guard is also a new addition. It's a handling bar to hang the helmet from, handy when on the march for example. To the side of the helmet there's another subtle change, clear cutouts for the ears. In older types, such ear gaps were either non-existent at all, or made by simply banging the metal outward at the place of the ears, instead of being cut out and covered with a separate guard piece. Their function was, obviously, to not have the helmet impair the hearing of the wearer and still have the ears protected relatively well. On the front is another striking decoration, the embossed wavy lines above the brow guard. Their function was probably similar to the other embossments on the back. Interestingly enough, these were always formed to a similar shape, somewhat resembling eyebrows. Whether it was just that, eyebrows, or there was another deeper meaning to it, is unclear.
There are some helmets from this era which miss the eyebrows completely and have a different type of crest holder on top. These helmets were grouped into different subtypes by a man who originally came up with all these classifications in the 1960s, a man called Robinson. His interpretation was that the eyebrows were a defining feature adopted specifically from the Celtic helmets, and so he theorized that the Weisenau type helmets with eyebrows were made in Gaul and the ones without were a cheap knockoff made in Italy, coining the subtypes Imperial Gallic and Imperial Italic. In truth, the helmets which Robinson thought were Celtic were actually Roman too, so the names Imperial Gallic and Italic are highly misleading and mostly avoided in the scientific community today.
Robinson also made a strict chronological classification of found variants of imperial helmets, ranked alphabetically from A to K and neatly tying them to their own quarter of the 1st century AD. These helmets all show clear differences amongst each other, mostly in the shape of the cheek pieces, neck guard or eyebrows. The division of these helmets into different subtypes is straightforward enough, but the chronology that Robinson applied to it deserves a bit of a side note. Because the great difficulty with dating helmets is that they could have a very long lifespan. And we know they did, because some helmets have been found with the names of multiple owners inscribed on them, signifying that they were passed on, from father to son or just between soldiers. Of course, it also makes sense. Why throw away an expensive item like a helmet if it's still functional?
With only few examples found of each imperial variant, it's safer to stick with the general trends within helmet design instead of looking at every little change in detail. Also, because these slight differences don't necessarily have to relate to a different time period at all, because helmets were produced in workshops all around the empire, and there was never only one type that was produced by all at the same time.
One such general trend within the imperial helmet types is for the neck guard to become bigger and more sloped as time passed. This is the last stage of development for imperial helmets, which is best demonstrated by 3 similar helmets dated to the 2nd century. As you can see, these helmets have huge, heavy and clumsy neck guards, which not only protect the neck but even parts of the back and shoulders. Also, the decorations are quite peculiar and different from the typical imperial helmets, but the overall shape is still very similar. Another interesting imperial subtype dating to this period has crossbars over the dome of the helmet to reinforce the helmet and absorb incoming blows. This was probably a reaction to a specific weapon encountered by Roman soldiers during the Dacian campaign under Emperor Trajan, the so-called falx, a two-handed sword with the tip pointing forward, ideal for reaching over the edge of an enemy shield. These helmets signify the end of the imperial type.
The trend of helmets becoming more protective continues in the 2nd century until helmets become so different from the imperial type that a new type name is justified. This is then the Niederbieber type, again named after a German town where such helmets were first found. And that town used to be the location of a big auxiliary fort which was raided and destroyed in 260 AD, allowing for an easy and accurate dating of the helmets.
Most characteristic for this type of helmet are the extended backside of the helmet and the big cheek pieces, which cover the ears completely. Some have even bigger cheek pieces, which close overlappingly in front of the chin. This helmet is the most protective helmet type of all Roman helmets and would hardly misfit a medieval knight in full plate armor. This type of helmet has often been interpreted as a cavalry-specific helmet, but there's really no good argument for this. Except for the helmets with face masks, there's really no convincing argument for any helmet belonging exclusively to either infantry or cavalry. From the 4th century onwards, another new type of helmet appears, the so-called comb helmet. This helmet forms a complete break with any of the former Roman helmets. Not only is the neck guard attached separately to the helmet, in a way which allows for it to move, but also is the bowl of the helmet no longer made out of one piece, but two, joined together with rivets to a metal band in the middle. Some of the helmets found have a metal comb attached to this band, perhaps as a substitute for the centurion's crests of old, or to denote another type of rank. This is just speculation though, as it must be noted that some of the most expensively decorated helmets of this type did not have such a comb. On the other hand, these type of helmets have no clear crest holders anymore, so an iron comb would have made for a particularly durable and low-maintenance substitute. But who knows?
With the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, we get to the end of our overview of Roman helmets throughout the ages. But wait, I hear you say, what about that famous helmet with the large brow guard, the ones from movies and series? Well, the reason for not having discussed that helmet sooner is because there's just so little known about them, and for good reason. Modern historians have named it the Attic helmet, and its origins lay in the Greece of the 5th century BC, although the few Greek helmets that are labeled as Attic helmets don't actually look much like the Roman ones we're thinking of. And the same goes for the very few Roman examples found. It is only in artistic expressions that we see a resemblance of the helmet in its Hollywood form. The most compelling evidence there is for that typical Hollywood-style helmet is a single relief in stone, the Arch of Emperor Claudius, dated to 51 AD, and the soldiers depicted are his praetorians, his bodyguards. But their entire dress just doesn't seem credible. They're all wearing muscle cuirasses and their typical fleshy underarmor, and their shields are just absolute masterpieces of art. And so diverse amongst each other, something seen nowhere else. And when it comes to flamboyancy, the helmets are the undeniable prize winner. There's literally not a square centimeter that is not covered in fancy decorations. What we see here is more than just their Sunday's best. This is the artist having a blast. A giveaway that this is fantasy and not reality, besides them all being dressed like the flashiest and richest of emperors, is their shields, which look like some odd version of an old Republican shield, and which don't have any corroboration in this time period at all. It's another strong indication that the artist wasn't looking to sculpt reality, but was going for a way more impressive and archaic look, often done in Roman art to insinuate some sort of deeper connection to the past. And their helmets are the ultimate expression of this. They are not a realistic representation of any helmet that was in actual use. Well, that really concludes this topic. I hope I've answered all your possible questions and you enjoyed watching. Thank you, don't forget to leave a comment and see you next time.